I am so glad I don't have to be in class today. So, the topic for today is talking about classes in grad school and what it takes to pass them, because it's going to be different than an undergrad. And I'm just going to say, kind of as an offhanded remark, is yeah, I kind of feel like one of those mornings where, like, oh boy, I've had my coffee, I'm yawning a lot. Perfect time to talk about classes because, in grad school, most students, they're more excited about research. They're more interested in other stuff. They don't want to take more classes. And, but as I was thinking about it here the last couple of days, I was like, yeah, I should really devote a little time giving some advice about what to expect when taking graduate school classes. And usually the bar is set a little bit higher than an undergrad. And at first, as I've said in another video, the classes will seem as if, oh, this is easy. I don't have to sit through any lab activities. It's just going to lecture, watching the professor give a PowerPoint presentation. I'm sitting, maybe there's no reading. There's limited homework. It'll start to seem like, wow, like, is this all I got to do is just sit here all semester? And it's important that you're actively participating, that you're doing any reading and any homework that's recommended by the professor, because you are going to be primarily graded by exams and maybe to some extent homework. But it's an opportunity for you to learn. And usually the classes you're taking in grad school are going to focus on your area or your specialty. But then there's also going to be some general classes. So you get kind of well rounded in chemistry or physics or biology, whatever it might be. And for the most part, the classes are going to be laid out for you as far as what you need to take. And you're not going to have like 500 classes to pick from. You're going to have more like 20 classes or less to pick from. And you're going to have, and then it's going to be based on what's available each semester. So your choices are going to be limited, but they're going to be more in tune with what you need to know to help you in your degree or as a professional with an advanced degree. So some of the key points that I want to address are on today's slide. And, it's important to recognize up front that in order to pass a graduate level class, you need to at least get a B. So if you occasionally had a C as an undergrad, that's not going to work as a grad student. You're going to need to get at least a B in each class. Now, I have known students who got a B minus or a C, and if that happens, then you have to have sort of a discussion as far as like if you're going to retake the class next time it's offered, or maybe take a different class. You may be put on probation until you get your GPA back above 3. Usually, like the sticking point is your GPA has to be above 3. So if you only have one class where you don't get a B, you really only need to worry about that one class and getting that, maybe retaking the class. But if you, struggle in more than one class, then it becomes a bigger issue because, how do you get your GPA up high enough and how do you also pass all your classes? And that can create some challenges for grad students. And usually you have to work with your department to rectify that. So it's really a situation you want to avoid. And one way to avoid it is only take the classes you're required to take. I know that some students like to take classes outside their major, or they want to take as many classes as they can in graduate school. And, typically once you start doing research, it you don't want to be taking too many classes. You want to try and get your classes wrapped up in those first 2 or 3 or 4 semesters, so that way you don't have to worry about your GPA anymore, and you can focus on the research you have to do in order to get your degree. So if you're taking a class every semester, that's really going to be a conversation you have with your supervisor as far as whether that's acceptable or not, because some faculty will say, no, I don't want you to do that, or they won't approve. And other faculty will say, yeah, that sounds like a good class, or you have a good reason to take that class, and they will support you in taking extra classes. But you don't want to just think that, oh, it's my decision. I get to decide what classes I take once I've taken my requirements. No, you do need to discuss that with your supervisor to make sure that that's okay, because the time you spend in class is taking away from time you could be doing research. Um, and really, how you survive those classes is by actively participating. And hopefully you've done this even as an undergrad, but you don't want to just sit there and stare into space or count ceiling tiles. You want to take notes in class. You want to do the reading. You want to stay on top of any kind of other um, assignments that you're given in your classes. And typically, on the bright side, you're typically only taking maybe 2 classes a semester where you're sitting in a classroom and learning and taking exams. You may be taking some other credits as well, I'm going to call it. So you may have to go to a seminar and you may get credit for going to the departmental seminar. You may take a course where it's a reading group where you're basically reading papers and discussing them, but there's no exam. It's just you're graded on attendance. You may take some kind of special topics course if it's offered, where again, that's like a reading course where there may be one exam, or there may be, maybe you have to do a presentation for that class, but you're not going to be taking 3 or 4 exams during the course of the semester. So, look for those opportunities where you can take some of these other classes, which are usually worth only 1 or 2 credits instead of 3 or 4, and you get to learn something different, or you're participating in a way where you don't have to worry about exams. But in all these classes, you're going to be given some kind of a grade, and it's going to affect your GPA. Um, Something else though is like typically you're not going to be doing any lab-based learning in your graduate level classes, at least in chemistry. And even when I was in meteorology, there really weren't lab-based classes. Now, we would talk about experiments, we would talk about experimental design. I do know some programs have like a lab techniques class where you talk about lab techniques, but it usually involves reading papers, discussing the literature more than actually going into the lab. If but don't be surprised, if there are some lab learning type courses, or there's always the possibility that depending on your background, you may be asked to take an undergraduate level class in order to make up for some deficiency. And if you take an undergraduate level class, there may actually be a lab attached to it. So when I'm talking about, lecture courses primarily as a grad student, that's if you're taking grad level classes. But it's not unusual sometimes for a grad student to be taking undergraduate level classes because there's a need to do that. So I hope this gives you a little bit of an idea of what to expect in graduate level classes and how that works. And I hope that you take this advice and think about it carefully so that you're better prepared, and hopefully you can maintain that 3.0 GPA and get your classes out of the way quickly and be able to move on to doing the research and participate in life after classes as a grad student. So I hope that you found this advice helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon in another video.